Over the last 10 years, the Broad Foundation has worked to reform public education. If there's one thing we've learned in doing this kind of work, it's that the most essential ingredient to successful change is a proper school board superintendent or chancellor, without which not much happens. If you have a bright, committed, hardworking, reform-minded leader who's focused on educating every child to a point that they're willing to shake up a sluggish bureaucracy, even make a few enemies along the way, and not worry about their next job, then the district stands a fighting chance of improving student achievement. We've met a lot of good superintendents, outstanding superintendents such as Joel Klein in New York City, Paul Vallis in New Orleans, Mark Roosevelt in Pittsburgh, former Superintendent Tom Pazant in Boston, our new Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan. And in fact, our Superintendent's Academy has trained a few of these, and others have been recruited as faculty members of our academy. But I must tell you, the superintendent or chancellor excites me the most, and who's working to completely overhaul one of the toughest urban districts in the country is Chancellor Michelle Rhee. Just over 2 weeks ago, she celebrated her second anniversary as Chancellor of the DC Public Schools. When Mayor Adrian Fenty was elected with 89% of popular vote, he took control of the schools and was encouraged by New York City Chancellor Joel Klein to hire a 37-year-old Korean-American woman who was a former Teach for America teacher in Baltimore and went on to found a New Teacher Project. Mayor Fenty appointed Michelle to head a district of 45,000 students and 144 schools. The budget for the DC Public Schools is $1 billion. That's the highest, third highest per capita budget in America. And it also is a district that had amongst the worst performing student achievement in the country. Only 43% of students who entered the 9th grade graduated in 5 years. And of those who graduated, only 9% got a college degree within 5 years of leaving high school. 90 of the 144 schools in the district were under federal notice to improve under No Child Left Behind. So you're in for a treat this morning. I hope our conversation gives you some insight into how tough the job is of an urban school district superintendent or chancellor, what successes she has had, what lessons she has learned, what she hopes to accomplish, and more importantly, how she plans to do it. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Rhee.
Thank you.
Michelle, did you have any idea what you were getting into when you took this job?
You know, interestingly, I actually did know because when I graduated from college from Cornell in '92, I joined a program called Teach for America, and I taught in inner city Baltimore for 3 years. And after that experience, went to graduate school and then formed an organization called the New Teacher Project that works with urban school districts and state departments of education across the country on the recruitment and retention of new teachers. So my job for the last 17 years has been working with highly dysfunctional school districts across the country. And so I did actually know what I was in for. And in particular, we had worked in Washington, D.C. And in fact, a couple of months before I got this job, we had just announced to DC that we were going to pull out of the district because they weren't sort of doing what we needed them to do as a city. And early on in these conversations, I got lots of calls from different people across the city saying, wait, don't pull out yet. The mayor is going to take over the school district. He's seeking mayoral control, so just hold tight until that happens. So we did, but I didn't realize that this was going to be the outcome.
Tell us what the district was like when you became chancellor. Is it true the district didn't even know the exact number of children who were enrolled, and that textbooks were stacked in warehouses, payroll problems were an ongoing situation, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of additional data points to the ones that Mr. Broad shared. We had, when I came into the district, an achievement gap between our wealthy white children and our poor and minority children of about 70 percentage points at the secondary level in some subject areas, 70 percentage points. And according to the NAEP examination, of all of our 8th graders, only 8% of them were on grade level in mathematics, 8%, which means that 92% of our children did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. And then probably the most disheartening data point was the fact that what my staff told me was that when our children came into the system, largely they were on par with kids from other jurisdictions or other cities who looked similar to ours. So when we got them, they were sort of about where they needed to be. However, the problem was that the longer they stayed in our school system, the worse off they were. So by the time they were in the 3rd grade, they were far behind their counterparts in other cities. And this was the most startling statistic, which was that the poor black 4th graders in New York City are 2 grade levels ahead of the poor black 4th graders in Washington, D.C. So for everyone who wants to claim that low academic achievement levels are because of poverty and single-parent households and all those sorts of things, the last time I checked, the poverty in Harlem did not look all that different from the poverty in Southeast Washington, D.C., but those children are operating 2 grade levels ahead of ours. So it gives you a sense of sort of, academically what our children faced. And then when I got in, I was a little sort of overwhelmed, as you might think, and people said, well, where are you going to start? And one of the things that we realized was that we had to figure out where the money was going. Because as Mr. Broad said, we were spending more money per child than almost any other urban jurisdiction across the country, but our results were the absolute worst. And so people were saying, well, find out where the money's going. And I'll just give you one example of this. Someone came up to me and said, did you know, Chancellor, that we spend $74 million a year transporting a few thousand special education kids through the system? So I did the math really quickly, and it turns out that it was about $18,000 per child per year just on transportation. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know anything about running bus routes, but I know I can do it for cheaper than $18,000 a year, because for $18,000 a year, you could literally buy the child a Saturn the first year and a driver for the Saturn every year after that, right? I know I can do it more cost efficiently, and then we'll push that money down to the classrooms. And what they told me was, well, that's what you think, but what you don't know is that we are under a consent decree, a court order, because the Washington, D.C. public schools had done such a poor job of transporting special ed kids back and forth for so long that now there's a court-appointed special master. He is allowed to spend as much money as he wants every year to transport these kids. And all we can do is pay the bill. We have no recourse. We have no ability to save any money. And I thought, this is literally the craziest thing that I'd ever heard, until 2 days later, when someone else came up to me and said, did you know that we are obligated to pay the private school tuition of special education kids who were not serving well in the district? And in some of these cases, the private school tuition is so incredibly immense. And then I was like, well, this is crazy. I've never heard of this before. And he gave me this example. He said, he's like, I was digging through to see, where are we sending these children to school? How much are we paying in tuition? He said, I found a circumstance of an employee, he said, who in two different cases that I was looking at, same employee, on the one hand, in one case, she didn't fill out a form she was supposed to fill out. And with another kid, she didn't have a meeting she was supposed to have. And in both cases, it resulted in both of these children getting sent to a private facility that cost this district $227,000 a year in tuition each per child. And I thought, this is nuts. I have to meet this lady, right? So my assistant calls the woman and says, ma'am, we need you to come to the chancellor's office today at 5 o'clock. And she said, well, I'm going to have to check with my supervisor on that. He said, ma'am, the chancellor is your supervisor. She's everybody's supervisor. And she said, well, then I'm going to call my lawyer. I'm going to bring my lawyer. He said, bring whoever you need to bring. Just show up at 5 o'clock. So at 5 o'clock, the woman is in my office. I sit down with her, and I said, so I understand you have a question about who you should report to and whether you should have come to this meeting. She says, no, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. That was my fault. I said, okay. And I pulled out the files. I said, this kid, you didn't have the meeting. This kid, you didn't fill out the form. I said, with two mistakes that you made, you cost this district nearly $500,000. Help me understand how that happened. She looked at me and she said, well, you need to understand that I am a very busy person. She said, I have too many children in my caseload, and things are going to fall through the cracks. That's just the way it is. And I looked at her and I said, no, you need to understand that if you believe this job is too big for you, then you need to go find a different job. I said, but if you're going to take the paycheck home every other week, then you have to take personal responsibility for ensuring that everything within your job purview gets done and gets done well. And she looked at me and she said, but that's not fair. And I literally, so this was, in the first few weeks of my tenure, and over again I was having conversations like this. And so literally within 2 months, I realized sort of what we had on our hands and the fact that the mentality and the culture in the district was such that people weren't really focused on sort of their jobs and accountability. They were much more focused on coming in from 9 to 5 every day and kind of pushing the papers.
Tell us about the benefits of working in a system that has mayoral control. And would you have taken a job had it not had mayoral control?
So first of all, I definitely would not have taken the job were it not for mayoral control. And even under mayoral control, I didn't want the job. And I had told the mayor that, and I said, I really don't think I'm the person for you. And he sort of talked me into it. But I will say this, everything that we have been able to accomplish over the last 2 years, it has absolutely nothing to do with me and everything to do with Mayor Adrian Fenty. This man is the most unusual politician I have ever met in my entire life. He is someone who, as Mr. Broad said, he was elected with 89% of the popular vote, so he had a lot of political capital coming in. And he promised me when I took the job, he said, you know what, anything you need, anything you want, I will make sure you have. So when I came on board, he brought the whole cabinet, all of the cabinet members, all of the department and agency heads together, and he looked at everyone and he said, no one says no to Michelle Rhee except for me. And he still hasn't said no to me yet. I'll just give you one example of how this plays out. As you know, heading into fiscal year 10, every city across the country is facing immense budget pressures. And in D.C. alone, we were facing an $800 million deficit heading into next fiscal year. And we were obviously concerned, as every school district was, about how we were going to handle that. And the mayor, sort of matter-of-factly, in one of our check-in meetings said, well, I'm going to hold the school district harmless. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And so I said, great, not knowing exactly what that meant. And I sort of watched how the politics played out. And over the course of the next few weeks, I saw all the politicians and leaders in the city saying, this is not fair. The district makes up the lion's share of the city budget, so they have to take their fair share. They have to shoulder their fair share of the burden. And he looked at everyone and he said, you know what? We are in the fiscal situation that we are in this country because of adult irresponsibility. He said, we are not going to make up for that on the backs of children. He said, education is my #1 priority. It is my focus. That's what a priority means. It means that you make everybody cut a little deeper so that you can protect your area of focus, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So we, I think, probably are the only school district in the country, perhaps, that will be heading into next fiscal year without any cuts.
You know, you made some very tough decisions during your first 18 months. You closed 23 schools. You fired more than 100 workers in the district's 900-person central office bureaucracy. You dismissed 270 teachers. You removed 36 principals, including a principal of the elementary school your two daughters attend. What was the impact of taking such swift action?
Well, we did do all of those things, and in fact more. And I think that, you know, the very first sort of major action that we took was based on the experiences that I had talked about before with central office employees who just weren't doing the job that we needed them to do for kids. And so one of the things that I realized as I was operating through the first couple of months was I started doing what I think most CEOs in a turnaround situation do. I started firing people. And about 6 weeks into my tenure, my then general counsel sort of ran into the office and he said, "Chancellor, you have got to stop firing people." And I said, "Why? If people are, you know, not doing their jobs, then we need to move them out and replace them with people who can." And he said, "Welcome to DC Public Schools, where we never fire anyone." And I said, "You know what? I think that's an exaggeration. People have told me that there is a process and, you know, we are allowed to remove people. So just tell me what the rules are and I'll follow the rules." And he said, "Well, there's only 2 ways that you can fire an employee from the schools." I said, "Okay, give me the first way." And he said, "Well, the person has to have done something egregious." And I said, "Well, that's perfect because everyone that I'm talking about is egregiously incompetent." And he said, no, egregious is one of 2 things. One, you either have to have hit a kid and we have to have the videotape to show it because the principal and 5 teachers seeing it is not enough. He said, or you have to have stolen money from the district and we have to have the bank receipt to show it. Short of that, nothing counts as egregious. I said, "Okay, that's not good news. Give me the second way that I can fire someone." And he said, "Well, you have to have shown a recurring pattern of incompetence." And I said, "Well, these people did not magically become incompetent the moment that I walked in the door. You know, we should be able to show that there's a pattern and then, you know, remove them." And he said, "Well, what you don't know is that for 7 years in this central office, no one has ever received a performance evaluation. And to meet the legal letter of the law of the documentation necessary to show a recurring pattern, you have to have had performance evaluations. We don't have any performance evaluations, so you can't do that either." I said, "Okay, that's really bad news. So what am I supposed to do with all of these people who aren't effective in their jobs?" And he said, "Well, you can do what we normally do." He said, "We send them down to the schools." And I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm trying to get these people away from children, not put them closer to." And so what I did, interestingly, was I sent them home, right? Because I figured I pay this lady that I talked about before $40,000 a year. 2 mistakes she makes in a given week cost me $500,000. I am much better off keeping her at home than I am having her come to work every day. And I went to the mayor and I said, "Look, you know, you brought me in to do a really difficult job. The difficult job turns into the impossible job if I can't build my own team." And he looked at me and he said, "You know what, if we don't like the rules of the game, then we're going to change the rules." And so the first thing that we did was we introduced legislation to the city council that would allow us to make all central office employees at-will employees. And that was firestorm number 1. And, you know, at the end of that, we actually got that passed, much to the chagrin of lots of people in the district. And I think that people thought, okay, that's it. That's going to be the big thing. A couple weeks later, we announced that we were closing 15% of the schools, which was 23 schools. People were very unhappy with that. And again, we removed about 1/3 of the principals from the system. We outsourced major functions in the school district that I believed school district officials have no business doing. Things like food service and security and technology and those pieces. We outsourced all of those. And you know, interestingly enough, that was over the course of the first sort of 12 to 18 months. And I think that those things happened in such rapid fire succession. And that's what sort of people became used to. And now, you know, this past year, we closed even more schools but there was hardly a peep about it. And I think that was because people said, well, it's only 3 schools this year, it's not 23, so we'll take it. And I think that's one of the advantages potentially. The mayor and I, our theory of change was that your power is greatest on your first day in office, and it precipitously decreases from there. And so all of the difficult things, the hard things that you have to do, you got to do early on, and that's what we did.
Have you adjusted your style in any way
Have I
since the early days of your job?
I haven't really adjusted my style since the early days of my job. I think that, and a lot of people have given me a lot of advice about doing so. I'm somebody who's very frank. I am very direct. I talk a lot about what needs to happen in the system and what is not happening for kids. And people who support me often come up to me and say, things could come out of your mouth a little nicer. And in fact, one very sort of prominent Democratic person came up to me one day and he said, I'm behind you, and lots of people, you could get more people behind you if you would just soften, Michelle, soften. And what my response to that was, I actually think that part of our problem in public education is that we are too soft. And that people aren't willing to talk about the facts. I mean, what I said before, 8% of our 8th graders are on grade level in mathematics. That is a crime. That is not something, so sure there are good things that are happening in the school district, and I could talk about those things as I went out in the public to all these speaking engagements, but what I feel that would do is lull people into a sense of complacency about the situation that we face in the district today. We face a situation where we, every single day in our schools, are doing our children a disservice because we are not providing them with the education they deserve and the education they need in order to be productive members of our society. And to kind of sugarcoat that fact and to not talk about the harsh realities, I think does not do our system or our children any good.
One of the most controversial proposals you forwarded is one that frankly excites me and other foundations interested in reform, is your attempt to convince teachers and their union to give up tenure and seniority in exchange for money. And I think a lot more money. You proposed originally to raise the base pay for a teacher with 5 years experience from $46,500 to $75,000. And the most effective teachers could make up to $131,000 a year, both in salary and performance bonuses. I think it's fair to say that these discussions with the local teachers union and Randy Weingarten of the AFT has been going on for, about a year now?
No, actually, it's going on 2 years.
2 years, okay.
Yes.
Tell us where things stand.
So let me give people just a little bit of background. We introduced a proposal to the union that called for a 2-tier pay system. And what we said was that every teacher could choose between the red tier of compensation or the green tier of compensation. In the red tier of compensation, those teachers would receive an across-the-board raise of 28%. They would get a $10,000 cash bonus, and their rights and privileges would essentially stay the same. Or they could accept the green tier, which called for a 45% raise in base pay, a $10,000 cash stipend, and bonus possibilities that were huge. So as Mr. Broad said, it would essentially double the pay of our most effective teachers. And by your 7th year of teaching on the green tier, by your 7th year, you would make a guaranteed base salary of $100,000 a year. And so when my team came up with this concept, I looked at it and I thought, this is brilliant, right? I am going to be the hero of the Washington, D.C. teachers. Everyone says teachers don't get paid enough. We're going to pay teachers 6-figure salaries, but everybody has a choice in the matter, right? Whether they want red or green. And so I can tell you that I could not have been more wrong. This thing went down like a lead balloon. Why? Because we said that in order to go on the green tier, that teachers had to give up their tenure. And that sort of caused this incredible angst amongst the unions and teachers and that sort of thing, because people said, well, why do we have to give up our tenure? And I said, well, you don't have to give up your tenure. If you don't want to give up your tenure, you can stay on red and you can still make a whole lot more money. But it was at that point that I realized that although people are concerned about how much teachers make and how much sort of we value teachers and the work that they do, that this issue of tenure was one that was really at the crux of the issue and of the negotiations. I am happy to say that we are making some good progress right now, and we are hoping that we will have a new contract in place for the fall. It will be a little different from our original proposal, but we feel very strongly that it will give everything to the district that we need to be able to run the schools effectively.
You and I talked yesterday about how Randy Weingarten, EFT, would characterize this contract, and I think you told me they're going to characterize it as a pilot. Is that correct?
If I had to guess, I would say that. I think that in many ways what we're doing in D.C. has been the bane of the existence of the union. And I think at the core of it, it's because we are trying to change the very essence of the kind of culture that has been permeated throughout the union ranks for decades. And I think that's a very scary thing, right? But the fact of the matter is it is something, I think, whose time has come. When you think about tenure and sort of, job protection and that sort of thing, you realize kind of how the dynamic is playing out right now. So people all the time say to me, oh, well, those evil teachers unions, you must hate them. They're the root of all your problems. And I actually disagree with that, because I believe that the unions are doing their job. The job of the unions, the teachers unions, is to protect the rights, privileges, and priorities of their members, to maximize pay, right? And those sorts of things. That's their job. And they do a very good job of that. The problem is that my job is to protect the rights, privileges, and priorities of children. Now, when those two things are aligned, what's good for adults and what's good for children, when they're aligned, then we have no problems. Where we come up against a lot of issues is where you actually have things that are in the union contract, provisions that are in the union contract that are good for adults but are bad for kids. And that's where I draw the line. I refuse to compromise what is good for children so that we can serve the best interests of adults. And we've run into a problem with that. And I'll sort of end by saying this. Right now, the culture within education and within the teaching ranks is basically once you have tenure, you have a job for life, right? You have to show that somebody has done something incredibly egregious, like incredible malfeasance, in order to remove a teacher from their position. But that's because the mentality is that they have a right to that job. I believe that mindset has to be completely flipped on its head, and that we have to now move out of this idea that having a teaching job is a right, to the fact that you have to show that you're doing good things for kids. And unless you can show that you're bringing positive results for kids, then you cannot have the privilege of teaching in our schools and teaching our children. And I think moving from one mindset to the other, moving from one mindset to the other, which is pretty opposite extremes, is going to cause a lot of angst amongst the union officials. But we're trying to push them as hard as we can.
Michelle, a third of the D.C. public school children are in charter schools. Why do you have so many charters in the district, and how do you feel about the job they're doing?
Well, I think part of the reason why we have so many charter schools is because we have an incredibly charter-friendly environment. There is no cap on charter schools, as there are in places like New York. And the funding formula is one that gives charters what they deserve, I think. They get the full per pupil allocation, the same amount that the district gets. So some districts shave off an administrative percentage and that sort of thing. In other districts, we do do not do that. They get the full amount. And on top of the about $9,000 per child that they get, they also get a $3,000 facility allotment on top of that, which is in places like California and other places where the per pupil expenditure is very low, then they end up spending a lot of that money actually on the facility. So we give them a facility allotment on top of that. So I think there are two things in combination. One is this environment and then the kind of resources that are there for charter schools. I think the second part of that is the incredibly poor performance of the school district. And I think those two things in combination have led to, as Mr. Broad said, about a third of the school-age children in the city and their families choosing charter schools. And I think personally, and I differ from a lot of my colleagues on this, that charter schools are an incredibly helpful part to the overall school reform effort in Washington, D.C. I'm a huge proponent of effective charter schools. We are home in Washington, D.C. to some of the top performing charter schools in the nation. We have KIPP and schools like E.L. Haynes and D.C. Prep, where, I mean, the data from those schools is absolutely phenomenal in terms of what they're doing for kids. I do think, however, that charter schools are at a critical time in D.C. For many years, for the past decade, they have been focused on scale. And I think that was actually the right call, because we would not have been able, the mayor would not have been able to get mayoral control. We would not be able to do the things that we're doing now were it not for charters, because people, quite frankly, are scared. Oh my gosh, are we going to ever have a public school district again? The charters are, getting so much of the market share, that sort of thing. So they've put pressure on the public school system to change in a way that wouldn't have been possible without that kind of scale. But I do actually feel like now the focus they need to pivot from scale to quality, because what's happening in DC is the spread of the quality of charter schools and the outcomes of the charter schools is almost as broad as it is in the regular public schools, right? So we have some really great public charter schools and we have some really crappy ones. And if that dynamic continues, and we continue to see a wide range of performance in these charter schools, then we as the district are not going to be able to say, to look at that as a system and say, we need to move towards that, the same authority and autonomy and hiring practices, et cetera, that charters have is what we need as well. But we're not going to be able to say that as a system unless they overall don't have the same spread that we do, but they are at in a different stratosphere, that they're actually across the board for all schools are achieving at much higher levels.
I presume you're the authorizer of charter schools?
I am not.
You are not.
I don't have any jurisdiction over the charter schools right now. I'm a big cheerleader for a lot of them, and we try to make sure that whenever we can advocate on their behalf, opening up facilities for them and those sorts of things. But right now, we are not a charter authorizer.
Who has the ability to either revoke charters or not renew charters?
We have a body that's called the Public Charter School Board, and they are an organization, I think, that is really grappling with this right now, is that how can they hold the charters to a higher degree of accountability.
Do you and the mayor have any say in all of that?
The mayor does. One of the great things about the mayoral control and the governance structure that was set up in DC is that everyone essentially reports to the mayor. So we don't have a school board anymore. The school board was removed, and I report directly to the mayor. We have a deputy mayor of education who oversees a state superintendent, and that state superintendent oversees a state board that oversees things like teacher credentialing and testing and accountability, those sorts of things. But all of those folks in the Public Charter School Board roll up into the mayor as well. So we have a very aligned governance structure, which means that everybody at the end of the day is accountable to the mayor.
DC public schools stand, I'm told, to gain $148 million in federal stimulus money, and your budget for this coming year is $763 million. How do you plan to spend that additional money?
In a few key areas. First, hopefully, to fund the new teachers union contract that we hope to have. That is a significant amount of money. We're giving raises in base pay, et cetera. So part of it will go towards that. We're also hoping to put in place a new principal compensation system that will be on par with our teacher compensation system. I would say the second thing is that we're investing pretty dramatically in data systems and infrastructure. As you said earlier, when I came on board, no one was able to tell me how many students we had in the district, how many special education kids, how many kids were coming to school every day, and it was because of a lack of basic infrastructure. So we're investing a lot in that. And then the third is that we are investing in pretty significant new programming in our schools. So we're starting more bilingual and dual language immersion programs, STEM campuses, high-tech campuses, arts integration campuses, gifted and talented programs. So a lot of things that typically, especially in hard budget times, are the things that tend to get cut. Because the mayor has protected our budget, because we have this infusion of stimulus dollars, we're actually able to increase the amount of spending that we're seeing in these areas.
What has the role been of the private sector in your turnaround efforts?
I would say that the corporate community, the private community, the philanthropic community have been incredibly supportive of everything that we have done. And for so long, I think, especially on the business side, business owners and folks in the city have sort of seen the condition of the schools deteriorate so much that now you've got tons of development going on in the city, but there aren't the skilled workers, right, to actually take those jobs. And so for a lot of the jobs that are being created in the city, we are not providing the students who are prepared to take those jobs on. So I think business interests really understand the importance of investing in what we're doing. And some of the folks have been very overt about doing this. I'll give you one example. When we put forth the legislation to make the central office employees at will, some of the unions and other folks started running radio ads saying, this is the most terrible thing that we've ever heard, and Fenty and Rhee, they're awful, they're tyrants, this sort of thing. And we kind of thought we were just going to have to take that on the chin, and that was part of doing business as usual. And what we saw happen was literally within 48 hours, a group of business and concerned citizens had pulled together, and they were running counter ads on the radio. And I think this was the first time that this dynamic had ever occurred. And so I think it's that kind of activism and advocacy. The business community understands very clearly that as we are making these hard decisions, we're going to get beat up a little along the way, and that it's their responsibility to sort of provide a counter voice to that, to say, you know what, even though these things are really difficult and some people might not like it, it's the right thing to do for education in the city. And so that's been extremely helpful.
You've attracted a lot of media attention. In the last 2 years, you've been profiled on the NewsHour and the Washington Post, Fast Company, Atlantic, Newsweek, and others. But when you appeared on the cover of Time magazine, posing with a broom, that photo caused quite an uproar in the district and local community. I was wondering if you had any regrets about that photo shoot. Would you do it over again?
I actually don't have any regrets about it. The odd thing was that I went to this photo shoot, and at the time they were still telling me, well, we don't know if we're going to, have you on the cover or not. And during the photo shoot, about 65-70% of the time, they were taking pictures of me with children. And then of the remainder of the time, it was mostly with these rulers. They had me holding rulers in different directions. And they only took like 3 or 4 shots with the broom. And then 3 days before the cover ran, they said, we have this great picture of you and the kids, and it's fabulous, and that's what we're going with. And I said, great. And then I look on the newsstands, and it's me with the broom. And I'll tell you, this is interesting. Apparently, years before then, they did the same thing with Giuliani. And at that point, it was, he's the hard-charging, he's cleaning house, it's sweeping out the old and in with the new. And with me, it was, oh, she's a witch. And she's, in her black with the broom. which gives you a little sense around the gender dynamics. But I for people who come to me and say, well, we felt like it was a bad message and that sort of thing, what I say to people is, if anyone believes that we did not need sweeping changes in this district, or that we did not need to clean house in order to make sure that we were functioning as an effective and efficient operation, then you can tell me now. And I said, but I firmly believe that is the case, and I feel like that was an accurate portrayal of that. So I have no regrets.
Michelle, what convinced you to pursue a career in education, starting as a Teach for America teacher?
So I grew up in a household where academics were, incredibly important. My father was a physician. They were immigrants to the country, and so they really pushed me. The expectation was that I would become a doctor or a lawyer, an investment banker, and I had always had an interest in working with children all through my sort of young life. And when I was at Cornell doing my undergrad degree, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I saw a PBS program about Teach for America. And at that time, Teach for America was a brand new program. And it was this documentary, and it sort of highlighted these three young people who were my age who were trying to change the world through public education. And I thought it was the most inspiring thing I had ever seen. So I decided to apply for the program and luckily got in. Probably today I wouldn't be able to get in. They're more selective than Harvard is these days. I got in. I was placed as a second grade teacher in one of the lowest performing elementary schools in Baltimore, Maryland. And at the time, my school tracked children by both behavior and academics. So since I was the new teacher, I got grade 2 track 5, which was the kids who had the most behavior and the most academic challenges. And I was incredibly bad my first year. The summer between my first and second year, I decided, I'm not going to let 8-year-olds drive me out of town. So I spent the entire summer planning. I mean, I was photocopying things. I was, making charts and graphs. And I had all of my aunts from Korea visiting that summer. And it was like a little sweatshop. They were cutting out like little shapes and whatnot. And my second and third year of teaching, a colleague and I decided to team teach. So we brought 70 kids into one classroom together, and we looped with them, which means we took them through their second and third grade year. And over the course of that 2-year time span, we took this group of children who were, when we got them, they were on average scoring at the 13th percentile on nationally recognized standardized tests. And by the end of their second year with us, 90% of them were scoring at the 90th percentile or above.
Wow.
But the interesting thing was that it had nothing. I did not at the time, and I still do not believe that I was an overly fantastic teacher. What it was pretty simple stuff. It was, we worked incredibly hard. We spent more time with the kids, right? I had them come before and after school. We were there on Saturdays. We invested their families in what we were doing, right? I used to give my kids 2 hours of homework a night, and people thought I was crazy. And now that I have little kids myself, and I can barely get through 20 minutes of homework. I know now that I was crazy. But back then, it made perfect sense to me because I thought, you know what? Our kids are not after school. They're not going to soccer practice and piano lessons and that sort of thing. They're sitting on the stoop, or they're watching TV, or they're playing video games. So we need that extra time to be able to make up. And as I invested the parents in this and sort of got them engaged in our vision, they were some of the hugest proponents of what we were doing long term. And at the end of the day, what I will say is this: those children and that academic gain that they saw over the very short 2-year time span, over the course of that time, who their parents were did not change. Their community and the violence they're in did not change. their diets, all that sort of stuff. None of those things changed. What changed was the adults who were in front of them every single day in the classroom. And that's what made the difference. The children had the ability, they had the aptitude, they had the potential. They just needed the right adults who were committed to this, involved, and sort of really pushing them to it. And that's not to say that all of those things that I was talking about don't matter. They do. They have an impact on kids. When kids, aren't getting proper health care and those sorts of things, that has a negative impact. So I don't mean to demean those factors, but at the same time, what we know is that as an education system, we cannot allow the reality of those challenges to serve as an excuse for why kids can't perform at the highest level. So we have to figure out, our job is to figure out, how do we navigate through all of those things, and how do we ensure that despite every single one of those obstacles, that our kids can still achieve at the same high levels.
Your classroom visits have become legendary. What do you look for when you go into a classroom?
Well, he says that because I go on school visits by myself. They are all unannounced. I do not stop by the front office before I go. What happens when you go to the front office is the principal comes out and she will steer you towards certain classrooms and make sure that you never go into other classrooms. And what I want to do when I go into a school is get a real, true sense of what is happening in that building and in that room. And that only happens when you kind of pop in. What I'm looking for is incredibly high quality teaching and children who are engaged in their learning and where progress and goals are very clear. And what I tell people all the time is, I tell teachers, I say, when I walk in, just pretend like I'm not there. Don't stop the whole class and good morning, Chancellor Rhee, and all that sort of stuff. That's wasting instructional time. Just go about your business. I was in a classroom the other day of a teacher, and literally when I walked in, she and the children did not skip a beat. They did not look up. They did not care that I was there. That's exactly what I want to see. And they were moving. I mean, there was not a moment that was wasted. Even when they were lining up to go to lunch, which was at the end of my visit, she was quizzing them all on their multiplication facts, and they had to get it right in order to get in line, and that sort of thing. So what we're looking for is teachers who have a real purpose in what they're doing, and that the children then feel that, and the entire room is purposeful, and children know exactly what the expectations are.
The average tenure for your 7 predecessors was about 3 years and 3 months. Do you think you'll stay throughout the term of Adrian Fenty?
So that statistic is actually wrong. That was in the Washington Post, but I am the 7th superintendent in a decade.
Wow.
Yes. So the average tenure was...
I'll stop reading the Post.
The average tenure is actually well below 2 years of my predecessors. And that is in line with urban school districts across the country. I think 2.4 years is the lifespan of the average superintendent. And I think that's for a lot of reasons. I mean, quite frankly, when you look at what most superintendents have to deal with in terms of a school board and politics and that sort of thing, it illuminates that. I don't have to deal with a lot of that, frankly, because the mayor, in my case, just runs interference on the political pieces. He doesn't want me to get dirty in the politics. He wants me to be able to run the schools. So he deals with a lot of that for me, which is incredibly unusual. The mayor and I often talk about the fact that it will take 2 Fenty terms to truly turn the school district around. So that would be 8 years. And 2 years into that, we feel pretty darn good that we are on track to doing that. So in our ideal world, we're looking at the 2-term time frame.
Well, that's great. We now have time for some questions of the Chancellor.
Good morning.
Why don't you announce your name and affiliation?
Hi, my name is Jolie Davis. Good morning. Michelle, I think you're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you.
Putting aside the quality of the teachers, what are the most important elements that other countries that have greater performance in how the children are doing there are? Is it the curriculum? Is it that they have more advanced curriculum? What are the other elements that make them succeed more?
It was interesting. I was at the Clinton Global Initiative a few months back, and I was on this panel, an education panel with a woman from India, a woman from Malawi, and myself. And I sort of heard each of those women talk, and I was thinking, why am I on this panel? And then as I heard them talk about their circumstances, I realized, well, we're not actually all that different in some ways from some of these developing countries. But what I said to those women is this. I said, a lot of what you're focused on right now seems to be access and things like facilities and books and those sorts of things, which are important. I said, but you always have to keep in mind what the end game is. I said, because in our city, we have all the resources, we have more schools than we could possibly need, we have the books, we have all those things, and we still are not providing children with the education they deserve because of the quality of educators in the classrooms. And so, you say, well, what aside from that? It's for us, it's all wrapped up in the quality of educator that's in the actual classroom. They have to have incredibly high expectations of the children. The children know, they can sense when someone has high expectations for them when they don't, and they will rise or fall to the expectations that the educator set.
So you're saying that the other countries feel that the quality of the teacher is really the key element? Then?
No, I'm saying that in other countries they're a little more focused on the infrastructure pieces and the access pieces. And while I think those are first steps to get there, you can't lose sight of the fact that even when you have those things in place, it can result in not educating the kids properly unless you also focus on the quality of the instructors.
But what are they doing that we're not, that makes us not be in the top 5 in the world?
So let me give you one example. Right now, if someone came in to do an analysis of the curriculum and the standards that this country has compared to the top 5 countries in the globe. And do you know what they found? That 85% of what's covered in American curricula, those countries don't even touch. So what does that mean? It means that we're spreading ourselves way too thin, right? We're a mile wide and an inch deep. And so what we need to do is focus on, I believe, for example, that when you walk into a 3rd grade classroom, you should ask the teacher, what are the things that you want this child to learn in math this year? And they should say, here are the 10 skills, right? Adding and subtracting fractions, doing perimeter and area, whatever those 10 things are, and that's all they should be focused on. When you have a curriculum book this high, with thousands of standards, then there's no way that the teacher and the children then understand what the focus is and what they should be mastering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Zeiler. I'm a business owner from New York City, and I'm on the board of the KIPP School in Brooklyn that's currently in the middle of an organizing by the UFT. And my question is for Eli Broad. And what direction will you give the next generation of entrepreneurs who want to save the next generation of urban kids? Your resources and convictions have demonstrated what works. Is it not now time to end the experimental stage on best practices? And my question is it not time for militancy to change the system nationwide? And the Obama administration allowed the private equity guys to dominate the auto industry bailout, to dictate the products, to bring the unions to its knees, and to throw out bad leadership. And why aren't you organizing us like Sinn Féin or AIPAC or Cesar Chavez? And why aren't you shifting your resources and approach and advocating for a Marshall Plan nationwide?
Wow. Well, I'm 76 years of age. We've been at this 10 years, and we have made progress in a number of areas in governance, management, charter schools, and other things. Look, there is some militancy. You've got the Education Equality Project that's got quite a broad group of people. You've got Democrats for Education Reform. You've got a number of other organizations that didn't exist. You've got a president today that believes in dramatic reform in education. You've got a secretary who's, no secretary's ever been closer to the President and Arnie Duncan, or his chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel. You've got all the stimulus money, and I think there's a lot of activity going on. Could there be more?
Would you be the next education czar?
Pardon?
Would you be the next education czar?
I don't think so. The czar sitting to my right.
Hi, Howard Gardner. Very interested to hear you today, Michelle. But one thing I didn't hear you talk about at all was, even when you were talking about the stimulus money, was teacher professional development. And you've been very candid in your remarks today, so I assume you're going to be candid on this question. You said kids need the right adults. To what extent do you think you can take somebody who is not a very good teacher initially, but is motivated, and use the system to help them get better? And I deliberately want to draw a contrast to you, where you and a friend sort of improved yourself. But that's pretty unusual.
Yeah.
And so where is the balance between just picking people like you,
Yeah.
maybe the Super Teach for America thing, and figuring that this is the room of teachers, you can't get rid of all of them, and the issue is to what extent can you take somebody who is not very good and make them the kind of person you want them to be, and how are you using your resources to do that if you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the reasons why I didn't mention professional development within our stimulus dollars is because I believe that that is the responsibility of the school district to do with the existing resources. We have increased, over the 2 years that I've been in office, we've increased the amount of money being spent on teacher professional development by 400%. We have put in place a full-time release mentor model for new teachers. We have release days every single month for teacher professional development. And I believe, the number of teachers that I talk to who come up to me and say, okay, I get it, you're really data-driven. I've looked at my data. My kids aren't doing as well as they need to be. So help me. What do you want me to do next? And so you've got a lot of those teachers who have the will but not the skill. And I think it's our obligation to ensure that we're providing the resources and the training necessary for those people who have the will to quickly come up the learning curve. However, and you knew that there was a however because you just rolled your eyes, so I know that. I will say this. You always have to balance that against understanding what you are potentially giving up. And let me tell you what I mean by that. My 2 children, my own daughters, go to the DC public schools. And I can tell you that if I showed up to their school on day 1 and their principal said, welcome to Olivia's class, here is her teacher, guess what? She's not so good. But we're going to spend this year professionally developing her to see if she can get better. Meanwhile, Olivia and her 23 classmates may not learn how to read, but we think this is the right thing to do for the adult. I would never accept that for my child. No one in this room would ever accept that for their child. But we have scores of children in our city who do not have the adult advocates in their lives, who can navigate their way through the system to the right teacher, et cetera, who are languishing in the classrooms of ineffective teachers. So, we might decide in that case, yes, that it's worth it. It's our obligation to professionally develop that teacher. But the research shows that, especially for poor and minority children, if they have 3 effective teachers in a row, highly effective teachers in a row, versus 3 ineffective teachers in a row, it can literally change their life trajectory. So what if that group of kids was unlucky enough to get another ineffective teacher the following year? Would we be willing to sacrifice 2/3 of that child, that group of children's opportunity in life so that we can professionally develop to adults? So that's the kind of thinking that I think, the kind of calculus, the kind of balance and the tension that we always have to be considering. And I'm not saying that yes, you always have to do professional development versus not. I think that whenever you're making the decisions about where you're putting the resources and how much to put and how much time to allow, that you always have to understand very clearly the impact that it's having on kids.
Yeah, I agree with your answer, and I don't want to take up more time here, but if you could point us to even one thing which you think is the best form of professional development for those teachers who have aspiration but not skill, I think that would be extremely useful both for the national and the international interest here?
So I'll tell you this, and it seems so obvious, but in many ways it's missing in lots of urban school districts across the country. One of the things that we realized is that we don't have a common understanding in our district of what good teaching and learning looks like. So you could ask 5 principals across the district, what is good teaching? And they'll tell you 5 wildly different things. Or you can show them the same teacher and say, is this teacher effective? And they'll give you 5 different answers. What we have to do is create a common framework and a common structure for understanding what our expectations are. So that's actually what we're about to roll out this summer. And it's very, very specific. It's like when we go into a classroom, this is how we're going to determine whether or not the level of student engagement is at, is what we need to see. Then we provide a lot of the resources behind that. So if your kids are not engaged, what are some of the strategies that you can utilize? But it's got to be in a framework that makes sense for teachers. Part of the challenge, and one of the things that's the hardest for teachers is that, and one teacher said this to me, she said, okay, just help me out. She said, we have the curriculum standards, we have the standards, then we have the curriculum, we have these textbooks and the teacher's guides, we have the DC CAS, which is our high stakes test, we have the benchmark assessments. She's like, just tell me what to do. What do you want me to teach? If you tell me, she's like, I'm not trying to be, not follow directions. She's like, but there's so much stuff that it's confusing. And so what I think we have to do is streamline, get rid of all of the, we have hundreds and hundreds of programs going on. We have to actually clear the brush a little and come down to that common teaching and learning framework. Get everybody trained in that and norm everyone to the same expectations. And I think that will actually help propel us to the place that we need to be.
Thank you.
Next question.
Good morning, Chancellor Rhee. My name is Kate Gruntiris. You mentioned that you had outsourced the security functions for schools. I'm wondering if you can talk about your approach to school disciplinary issues, particularly violence and conflict. It's my experience that even in the presence of an extremely talented teacher, a young person, particularly in an urban environment, who's worried about a fight after school on the way home, won't be able to concentrate. What is your approach to school disciplinary issues?
Right before I came in, the mayor had made this decision to outsource security to the MPD, the Metropolitan Police Department, because he thought they're the experts. But we have an incredibly talented and visionary police chief. So she's this 39-year-old woman, and she's just amazing. And she and I are on the exact same page when it comes to school safety and security, which is putting more police officers in the schools does not make kids feel safer. And it's not, kids will say, if there's more police around, it makes me feel like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me, right? And so we're taking a more holistic approach to school safety and security overall to say, what is the environment that we want to create in the school? And instead of hiring dozens and dozens of security officers, do we want to put more of those resources into peer mediation programs around conflict resolution specialists in the schools, those sorts of people who can, instead of just reacting when the negative thing occurs, when the fight occurs and that sort of thing, that we can proactively be teaching our kids some of the skills that long term they're going to need to have to be successful in life, right? It can't be that when somebody comes up and sort of calls you a name that then it's Fist City. Our kids need to understand how to work through those issues in a way that is going to be productive, and that is a skill that they're going to need far after they leave the classroom and the school. And the other thing I'll say is that we are moving away from out-of-school suspensions. We don't believe that sending a kid out of school for 20 days, 30 days with a packet of homework, you're basically abdicating your responsibility for those instructional minutes. So we're putting in place new programs around in-school suspensions where kids can continue to get the instruction and the services that they need and sometimes be removed from the classroom environment where oftentimes they can be a huge distraction to the 90% of the kids who are there to really concentrate and learn.
Yes.
Thank you. Diana Church from Louisville, Kentucky. And you talked about your success and how it's pretty unique, right? That you've got mayoral control and you've got pretty high cost per student funding. And I just wonder if you have any tips or strategies on how your success might be replicated in school districts that don't have those
unique circumstances?
So here's what I'll say on that front. I know that I'm incredibly fortunate. I think every other urban superintendent across the country would want exactly the setup that I have. What I think we're trying to do, first and foremost, is serve the children of DC well. But the other thing I think that'll be a byproduct of that is that when we see the results that we've already begun to see and that I think we will see over the next 6 years, and to say this is the model. You need to have mayoral control, not just mayoral control, but from a mayor who is incredibly focused in on education as their number one priority. You need to be willing to take on a tough fight with the teachers union contract, et cetera. We'll sort of create kind of the formula for how to do this. And then I think you'll see the results, and then it will be a choice in every city. Are you serious about this reform, or if you're not? And if you're serious about the reform, here are the things that you would have to put in place in order to make it happen. And you can't, continue to slash budgets and that sort of thing, and then still expect to see, huge results along the way. And so I think what we're hoping to do is create a model for how this works, and then, put it out there to say, if other cities want to see the same thing, they're going to have to make the same kind of commitment. And if you're not willing to make those commitments, then, you're sort of damning yourself to the same sort of low outcomes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mel Estrin, and born and bred and present Washington, D.C. resident and a product of the school system, and watched it deteriorate and have watched what you're doing now. Very excited. But one of the things that struck me was the two-tier plan that's being put forth, rewarding with 28% and $10,000 what clearly appears to be many of either incompetent or mediocre. How does that not end? And I know to try to buy and get something from the unions and the whole system, but how does that not leave us at some level of mediocrity or below where we should be after doing all these things? That's what's a little frightening, a little scary to me.
That's a great question. So first of all, I think that the two-tier plan and the choice is important because there are some teachers who are actually very good teachers who are just a little risk averse. They came into the system under a different set of understandings, and they ought to be able to continue that on and still see their pay rise. But what you're talking about, I think, has to be handled not through the compensation system, but through the evaluation system. If you look across the country at the number of teachers that we dismiss because of incompetence, it is in the single digits. I mean, it is extraordinarily low. One thing that the teachers union told me when I first came in is they said, well, we have a system. It's called the 90-day plan, and nobody ever uses the system. But if you think there are incompetent teachers and we don't have any interest in having not good teachers in the classroom either, just use the plan. So we actually used the plan this year, and we moved out hundreds of teachers through the plan, and now the union is saying, wait, we don't like that. And I was like, wait a second, you told me before to use the plan, and now that I use the plan, you say you don't want me to use the plan. I think that school districts have to do a much better job of evaluating teachers in an authentic way. I think that if you look at our principals across the board, they're very conflict averse. They would much rather rate somebody satisfactory than rate somebody unsatisfactory and have that person yelling and screaming at them and causing a headache. And so we have to sort of really see a cultural change. The other thing that we've done, which is somewhat controversial but I think very important, is changing the way that we grant tenure. In almost every school district in the country, you have new teachers who are on a probationary period for 2 years before they're granted tenure. But if you look at the statistics, it's just a matter of fact. Everybody gets it. We've done a much better job, I think, of making sure that people are going through a rigorous process and that only the most effective teachers are granted tenure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shelley Porges, Washington, D.C. I commend you on your tremendous sense of urgency, particularly as a former executive from a turnaround company. I watch what you do, and I said it's exactly what we would do in a turnaround.
Thank you.
Your sense of urgency, and even more importantly, your continued focus on the kids. I'm also the mother of a Teach for America teacher, corps member in New Orleans. He just finished his first year. Like you, he volunteered for the school for expelled kids who got expelled for drugs of violence. So it's even another layer of challenge, let's say. That said, while I was watching you through the teacher negotiations and very much supporting what you were trying to do, I came to have some new perspective through his experience, and that is that one day he walked into school and the principal interceded, as he was walking in and said, "You're suspended, you leave," without any notice, without any information about what he's being suspended for. Up to this point, he'd been one of the most highly rated teachers already, with progress with his kids in testing and all the rest of it, tutoring, doing all the things that you talked about. And he had no idea. Then he gets notified that he is being suspended for using a book in the classroom when there were no book standards, which he's highly researched. It was a National Book Award winner for preteens. And the next thing he's told is, you're having a hearing with the superintendent. You should join the teachers union. As a Teach for America teacher, he was not a member of the teachers union. He had the back. And you should hire a lawyer. Now, this is a young kid, first job, first year in school. What protections as it turned out, all's well that ends well, but not without a lot of, angst.
Yep.
Because he was able to defend himself and show what a high-quality book he was using. And yes, it had some bad words in it, but as he read it to his younger students in order to engage them in the idea of reading and that books have value and interest, it was Sherman Alexie's, Diary of a... it's a fabulous book, National Book Award winner, and many other things.
What is the question?
What protections does he have, do the teachers have in the system? All along I'm with you, and then I'm realizing, what protections do teachers have?
I think that the part of the problem right now is that the situation is framed in such a way that, you're either for protecting teachers in the union or you're sort of, for at-will employment, arbitrary and capricious and all that sort of stuff. There's a balance in between. And I believe that it is the job of the school district to put in place structures that ensure that high quality and effective teachers are not arbitrarily dismissed. Because quite frankly, we have some principals in the system who aren't very good and who are making poor decisions. And we can't allow great teachers to sort of be employed at the whim of these people. But that can be done within the school district structures and in a way where it doesn't create the perverse dynamic that it currently exists with teachers' unions, where they spend 90% of their resources protecting people who actually should not be with children. So I don't think that we have to move away from the extremes and move towards a middle ground where teachers understand that there are processes, there are procedures, that there are protections to ensure that they're not arbitrarily dismissed, but at the same time are not so cumbersome that it doesn't allow us to remove ineffective teachers from the system.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Let's take two more questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you both for your contributions. My question is regarding Teach for America. I have one highly regarded educator who says, don't do Teach for America because they're inexperienced, you need all this experience and so on. Given your background, can you speak to that question and so on?
Sure. Well, I was a Teach for America Corps member, and I'll tell you this. A lot of people say, well, it takes a while to come up the learning curve. It's, they're only in the classroom for 2 years. What I would tell you is that oftentimes when I go into our lowest performing schools and I walk into classrooms where I see incredibly good quality instruction happening, it's in the classroom of a Teach for America Corps member. And quite frankly, I would rather have a very high quality teacher for 2 years than a mediocre teacher for 20 years. I think it's all sort of a matter of perspective. And I'll tell you this, it's a funny story. The children know the difference. So I was restructuring 27 schools in the district because they had not met No Child Left Behind standards. And I went and I asked kids to come and tell me what they thought I should do. There was this huge debate going on. One of the kids stood up and said, I'm afraid that because you're Teach for America, you like all those kids, and I'm here to tell you, I don't think they're any good. They're clueless. They come from God only knows where. And I think that the veteran teachers who know us, who have been here for a long time, those are the better teachers. And this girl across the room stood up and said, I completely disagree with you. She said, in my high school career, the best teachers that I've had have all been Teach for America. Yes, they come in clueless, but they really quickly come up to speed, and soon they are doing things that no other teachers would do. They're so committed, they're so energetic, they're willing to sort of go above and beyond. And then at the end of this sort of back and forth conversation, one of the kids stood up and said, well, I think our lesson here is that it's not about whether a teacher is black or white or new or old or Teach for America. It's about whether they believe in us, whether they care about, whether they know their content and they're good sort of instructional people. And all the kids were like, yeah, that's right. So I think the sort of differentiation between Teach for America not as one that we shouldn't necessarily dwell too much on, and more focus on high quality educators, because there are high quality educators regardless of the source that they come from.
Last question.
Charlotte Steele from right outside New York City. You sort of talked about getting the ineffective teachers out, and I was just wondering, as part of sort of long-term planning and solutions, do you see increasing and intensifying the barriers of entry to the profession as part of your solution, and sort of making sure that teachers are up to the challenge and that new teachers know sort of this is a privilege and that sort of?
So when I was at the New Teacher Project, we had Tom Kane from Harvard come in and do this study of our teaching fellows, the Teach for America folks, and then traditionally certified folks from ed school, because we wanted them to be able to tell us what input factors differentiate our most highly effective teachers on the back end. And what they told us is, you can't tell, right? None of these things really sort of can definitively tell you. So what I think we need to focus on is not sort of raising more and more barriers and creating more bureaucracy, but actually to cast an incredibly wide net, to bring teachers in, to provide them with high quality support. And then after their second year of teaching, when we have good data about the amount of value they're adding to students, then we make the call as to whether or not they should remain in the system. Or not. So I think the focus has to be on, how do we measure their effectiveness once they're in the classroom?
Let's all thank Chancellor Michelle Rhee for an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much. Was it fun?